Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to see you, and for our friends in Gallup and those who are watching online today, thank you for joining us. So, I think probably the coolest thing that has ever happened to me is becoming a grandparent. In fact, I'll just go ahead and throw this out. If I would have known being a grandparent was so great, I would have just skipped over having kids. Okay? And those of you who are grandparents understand what I'm talking about. So we're going to call July 2021 Brandon and Tara Schaefer's official month of grandkids. We are now entering our third week of having grandkids in our house and different things. And this last week, all three grandkids, their parents as well, but all three grandkids and their parents were at our house. And our youngest grandchild, her name is Avery, she just turned 2. And I'm going to tell you, it is so cool because I now get to see the world through the eyes of a 2-year-old. And quite honestly, I was trying to light the world on fire when I had kids, and I'm a little bit more laid back. And so it was really cool. We got to go to the zoo, and like she loves rhinoceros, and she calls it Baby Nino, which was like the cutest thing ever. And so she's starting to put words together and sentences together, and when she says "Pops," it melts my heart. And so some of the words that she's using, well, they don't quite come out the way she's intending them. Like, we have a lot of stuffed animals, and one of the stuffed animals we have at the house is Snoopy. And when we ask her, "Who do you have?" she says, "Poopy," which is officially cute. So I'm just going to tell you, it's amazing. And so some of her words are not quite as good as they should be, but there is one word that she says very clearly. And when she says it clearly, she says it emphatically. And it's usually because one of her older siblings has one of her toys, and so she says, "Mine." And listen, I'm not throwing Avery under the bus here. Please understand this. I'm not throwing Avery under the bus because she's 2. And universally, throughout all of history, the favorite word in every tongue and dialect of every 2-year-old is "mine." And the reason why? Because it doesn't matter whether you're 2 or 42 or 92. There is this instinctive impulse within all of us that basically says the most important person on the face of the planet is me. Selfishness reigns supreme. And I'm going to go as far as to say this. I mean, selfishness is always going to be an issue, but we've had something happen over the last several years in the United States and really throughout the world that I believe has thrown gasoline on the fire of selfishness. It's called the internet. Okay, so internet is, I'm going to say, a neutral thing, but it has some good and it definitely has some bad within it. But one of the things that we don't really realize that is happening behind the scenes is our identity is not necessarily being stolen, but it is definitely one of those things that advertisers understand our identity much more than what we do. And so, like, if you want to, like, my wife and I are going to be celebrating like 30 years in a couple of years, and we've already started thinking about where do we want to go on this trip for our 30th anniversary, and we started looking at cruises, and now every web page I go on has an advertisement for cruises. And so whether we know it or not, the internet has fanned the flame of selfishness, that you will be better and your life will be more significant if, and they're giving us stuff that's already on our minds. Now, you add to that social media, and social media, let's just call it for what it is. It's a narcissist factory because they have people who work for them, who understand the human mind, that says, hey, when they see those little red hearts and those little red notifications and different things like that, there's a little bit of a dopamine drop in there that makes them feel good. And so let's just keep those bad boys coming, so they'll just keep coming on our platform. And they understand that hate gets clicks, but you're going to just keep going there time and time and time again. And then you add to it just the craziness of our society. We are so extreme. Our politics, they're so extreme. Where people land on COVID it has been so extreme. And then we have the issues of identity and sexuality and race and all of these things. And basically, the message that we are getting is only you matter. Whatever you want is going to reign supreme. Listen, there are differences out there. But the one that matters is, who are we in Jesus? But in the secular world, Jesus doesn't matter. And the only thing that matters, YOLO, right? You only live once, is doing everything that we can to feed self. So let me share something. Selfishness is nothing new. It's not like all of a sudden the 21st century came along and said, hey, y'all are selfish now. In fact, there is actually a man who has written a book called The Righteous Mind. It's like a 500-page book, and I'm wading through this right now. But one of the things that Michael Haidt says in this book about all of humanity and every person is that we are all self-righteous hypocrites. In other words, basically what he is saying is we're all selfish jerks. Some of us conceal it a little bit better. Some of us can kind of control it a little bit better. But the fact of the matter is, the vast majority of people in this world have a God, and their number one God is self. There's actually a story in the life of Jesus. We're going to look at that story. It's actually in the book of Mark, chapter 10. In Mark chapter 10, and that's actually going to be page 846 in the Bibles that are in the seats in front of you. We're kind of journeying through the book of Mark this year, and as we journey through this book, we're kind of taking a look at different facets of the life of Jesus. And right now, we're in an area, in fact, this is interesting, that Jesus asked the question, who do you say that I am? And the apostles said, well, you're the Christ. And the fact that they answered that question, it's almost like Jesus said, okay, now we're going to deal with some expectations that come with knowing that I am the Christ. And so we're going to kind of dive into that here this morning. In fact, this is kind of the last part of this section of the book of Mark, but we're going to start with verse 32. And let's just go ahead and look at this. It says, and they were on the road going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was walking ahead of them, and they were amazed, and those who followed him were afraid. And taking the 12 again, he began to tell them what was about to happen. Now, I want to just kind of point out a few items about this, because we're going to be moving to the story about selfishness. There's a few items that really kind of stand out here. Number one, Jesus was walking ahead of them. Typically, when they're on a walk in the book of Mark, as they're walking along, Jesus is teaching them, but he's now walking on ahead of them. We have now kind of turned the corner. We were in basically Galilee, and that was the region. We've now moved into the region of Judea, and Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. And we're getting ready to go into the final week of Jesus' life. And so I think about Luke chapter 9, verse 51, where it says that Jesus resolutely set his face toward Jerusalem. And I think that's what's happening here, where he is now in this focus of, I'm going to the cross. And that's the purpose by which he came. Another thing is that they were amazed at the change. I don't know exactly what this means, but did Jesus' demeanor change? Did his face change? They were absolutely amazed at this. Maybe his resolve had changed, but it also says that they were afraid. And I think they're still seeing Jesus through human eyes and not spiritual eyes. They're still seeing Jesus in the way that he is going to be this earthly Messiah, and he is going to set up an earthly kingdom. And the only way that he can set up the earthly kingdom is war. And so maybe his followers are starting to kind of go, it's about ready to be go time. And so Jesus again begins to teach them. And in verse 33 it says this, "See, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death and deliver him over to the Gentiles. And they will mock him and spit on him and flog him and kill him. And after 3 days, he will rise." Now, this is the third and final time that Jesus predicts his death in the book of Mark. But one of the things that's interesting to me is the absolute precision that Jesus gives the details of everything that is going to happen to him. He talks about arrest. He talks about being handed over to the Gentiles. He talks about his final hours in a real and just precise sort of way. Yet they still don't understand it. When it happens, they still don't get it. And so as they're going along, Jesus has told them about the crucifixion. He has told them about his resurrection. They understand that there is a pivot point that is happening in the life of Jesus right now. And notice verse 35. Verse 35 through 37. "And James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came up to him and said to him, 'Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you.'" That's a pretty bold prayer. That's a pretty bold request. "And he said to them, 'What do you want me to do for you?' And they said, 'Grant us to sit one at your right and one at your left in your glory.'" Now, I think that there's still messianic expectations that are different than the way they're going to play out. It's interesting to me, and we're going to go ahead and get this in a few moments, but Jesus had already covered this. You see, the disciples at one point in time were arguing in Mark chapter 9. They were arguing over who was the best, who was the most prominent, who was the greatest in the kingdom. And Jesus went on to teach them to say, greatness in the kingdom comes with humility. That's the mark right there. And so James and John come up, and I think that they are still thinking war, physical, literal war with Rome. Jesus is going to kick them out, going to set up this grand messianic kingdom, and they're thinking, we're going to be the key generals. We're going to be the 4-star generals, one at his right, one at his left, and that's who we're going to be. And in their minds, I envision that they're thinking, we got to get here before Peter gets here. Right? And oh, how great it's going to be that I will get to bark orders at the other 10 who have been jockeying for this position since the day we all kind of got together. And so basically, no matter how you really kind of shake this, this is an example of unchecked selfishness in the life of people. And here's one of the things we got to get. After all this time with Jesus, James and John still don't get it. Think about this. We have very little of the life of Jesus. Mark is just really kind of a quick book. We're probably dealing with, in the amount of time of what Mark shares about the life of Jesus, really a very short time. These guys were with Jesus for 3 years. 3 years of walking with Jesus and eating with Jesus and asking Jesus questions. And folks, there's got to be more than what is in the Gospels that Jesus taught and them asking questions, and they still don't get it. And I have to say, sometimes neither do we. We don't get it either. But notice how Jesus responds to them. We're going to look through verse 40. It says, Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized?" And they said to him, "We are able." And Jesus said, the cup that I drink, that I drink, you will drink. And with the baptism which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared. Again, I think they're thinking of power and prestige and position and their own personal glory. They get to be the 4-star generals. They get to be the leaders of this new Messianic army. But then Jesus comes up with this whole idea about cup. And I think cup is very important when Jesus says, listen, you don't know the cup by which I'm about to drink. If you go back or actually go forward when Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane and he is praying to God, he says, "May this cup be taken from me." The cup is the wrath of God that is going to be poured out on Jesus as he pays for the sin of the world. That's the cup. The baptism is the violence and the judgment and the horror of the cross that is going to flood over him. And Jesus gets this. And he's trying to explain, listen, you don't really get what you're asking. And James and John are like, yeah, sure, bring it on. He's fine. You're going to get this. And we understand future, the judgment that they are going to walk through because they were followers of Jesus. One of the things that I love here, though, is that Jesus says, listen, whether you get to sit at my right or left is not up to me. Even as a member of the Godhead, as the Son, Jesus always refers to the authority of the Father. And I think that's important because we're going to see that Jesus begins to teach here in a few moments and begins to lay out the standard by which he has called every single one of us to. But let's go ahead and look at verse 41. Verse 41 says, "And when the 10 heard it, they began to be indignant at James and John." So, the word indignant, I don't know about you, but when I hear this indignant is one of those words that only happens a few times in the Bible. One of the times Jesus was indignant. Here we find that the disciples were mad at a couple of their closest friends. Indignant is like the strongest form of anger. It's like if anger had levels, and I think anger does have levels, this is extreme. This is an absolute boiling point. Now we have to ask the question, why were they indignant? Why were they indignant? Because I have to look at this, and they were indignant at James and John. They were got at the audacity of their selfishness. But let me ask you this question. When you are got at the selfishness of people, is there ever anything inside of you that says, gee, I wish I could get away with being that selfish? Stuck in traffic the other day, and I'm just going to tell you, if you're one of those people, we need to talk. Stuck in traffic the other day. And you know when you're supposed to merge left or merge right? And like 99% of the people merge left or merge right. But there's always that one person that says, rules don't apply to me. Anybody? I mean, I almost got to an indignant point the other day because in fact, I was driving. I told Tara, I said, you know what I'd just do? I'd just like move over. But sometimes I'm got. But you know what I'm got at? That I don't have the guts to do that myself. And sometimes I look at the disciples. They're ticked that James and John got to Jesus before they did. Because all of them wanted to be where James and John wanted to be. They all wanted to be at that place where there was power and prestige and importance, and they were able to have the authority to bark orders at people. And so here's the reality. It's not just that James and John didn't get it. None of them got it. None of them got it. At which now Jesus says, okay, guys, let's talk. And it's almost like Jesus, I said, all right, guys, circle the wagons. Let's circle up. Let's deal with this. We've dealt with this before, but I want to deal with this in a different way. So maybe you will get it. He says, you know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. You see, here's how the world works. The world works with people fighting to be number one. The world works with people racing to the front of the line. And actually, the world works in such a way that those in positions of authority got to the position of authority because they ran over people, and their role of authority is all about them. Listen, Nero is an extreme example, right? And we always point to Nero and say that he was such a horrible, egotistical, maniacal leader. But I'm going to venture to say that most leaders tip toward the scale of Nero. I look at what happened in Haiti this week with the assassination of their president, and reading between the lines a little bit, I don't understand it all, but it appears that he was tipping toward the scale of Nero. Now, I've been in the church world all my adult life. For the most part, I've not had a job outside the church. But I get to talk to people who are dealing with work situations. You know what I hear more than anything else? My boss is a jerk. And when somebody says, I think I'm going to change jobs because my boss is a jerk, you know what I tell them? Statistically, the chances of your new boss at your new job, pretty high. I'll even go as far as to say that in working with people through the years, there just comes times where it's just, there are certain people that don't need to be in leadership positions. Oftentimes what I have found in the church, people who are fighting for it, they're pretty scary when they get there. Jesus says this, not so among you. You see, looking at verse 44, I think is really important. And whoever would be first among you must be slave to all. Not boss, not ruler, but slave. And ultimately, Christ followers are to be marked by the humility of service, not by power or position. We really need to work in such a way that we're putting the needs of other people before our own. That humility, thinking of others as more important than yourself, reigns supreme. So let me tell you, the coolest thing that has happened in my adult life, I've loved what I've done from the time that I have gotten into the ministry, and this is the coolest thing. I can't believe God lets me get up here and talk to people and so on. But there was one time that I kind of had career envy, and it actually happened like 5 or 6 years ago. I was invited to be part of a mentoring group, and the mentoring group was about 100 pastors throughout the United States that we were put in groups, and that we were mentored by some of the more prominent pastors and ministers throughout the United States. Officially cool. Our first meeting was in Vegas, which kind of weird to have a ministry conference in Vegas. Just going to throw that out. But anyway, the guy who was in charge of the conference used to be an F-16 pilot for the Air Force. And he knew the commander of the Thunderbirds at Nellis Air Force Base outside of Vegas. And so part of the conference was we got to go meet with the leadership of the Thunderbirds. And we got to go into the hangar where they kept the Thunderbirds, and we got to go out to the tarmac for like an hour and watch F-16s take off and the Thunderbirds practice and so on. And I'm just sitting there like I'm a kid going, when I grow up, I want to do this right here. But here's the cool thing. We got to actually spend time with those who were in the leadership of that particular area of the Air Force. And so many things came out of that just were applicable to ministry. But one of the things that was interesting is somebody goes, okay, so let's say you have two pilots. And those two pilots, as far as the score sheet, they level up almost perfectly. It's really a toss-up on who do you choose. And he said, if you're in this situation, what do you do? What's your determining factor to say, I'm going to choose this pilot over this pilot? And without taking a breath or thinking about it for even a second, the commander said this: humility. We're flying at 500 miles an hour, sometimes inches and feet apart. We don't need somebody who is trying to make a name for themselves. We need a team guy. We need a teachable guy. And we need somebody who is going to make everyone else look better. And I was like, that'll preach. Because I kind of think that that's what Jesus is saying. In fact, he makes a big reveal about himself. Notice verse 45. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Here's what we have to understand. The Messianic rule of Jesus, the rule of Jesus, was inaugurated by an act of humility and service, death on the cross, not a power play. And so here's where it gets real for me. This is what it means for us. This is our bottom line. This is what Jesus, I think, is saying to us. As Jesus walks the path of sacrifice and surrender, so should we. As Jesus was willing to lay down his life, as he was willing to do everything that he could to make us better, that's what needs to happen within the church. And honestly, that's tough, but let me just talk about ways that we can own this here today. One is this: acknowledge and own our own selfishness. So, see, the issue is not whether or not you are selfish. The issue is how are you selfish. So I think you have to identify the how here, because it's going to manifest itself in many ways. And it might even be the humble brag. It might even be the, I'm really a humble person. Didn't just come out that way. Let's just go ahead and say this. Also, let me just say this. Take Jesus' offer on the issue of being a ransom for many. And ransom includes you. This means that Jesus paid the price that was on our heads. And so when Jesus pays the price, which is on our heads, in fact, when it says here that he is a ransom instead of many, he died our death instead of many dying. And so if you've never said yes to Jesus, listen, I'm not going to say that you're going to come up out of the waters of baptism and no longer be selfish. But you will have a spirit living inside of you who will challenge you all the time on your selfishness. And so I'll go ahead and say this too. Choose a towel over blank. You see, Jesus, on the night that he was betrayed, washed his disciples' feet. He chose a towel over his throne. He chose a towel over his position and power. Listen, I was talking to one of my kids this week, and we were talking about dealing with people. And as I was talking with them and kind of coaching them through, and I said, listen, this person has never gone through the process of having that switch flipped in their mind where they realize these words, it's not about me. And one of the best ways that we can figure out that life is not about me is not seek power or prestige or position or title, but to be a servant, to be humble, to do what we can to make those around us better. Let's go to God. Father in heaven, thank you for our time to look into your word. And Father, may we understand that Jesus is the only remedy for our selfishness. God, right now I pray that as we dive into your word, as we go into this time of communion, as we look and see what needs to be changed, that your Spirit will reveal to us exactly what it is that we need to do. God, right now, mold us and change us. Pray all this in Jesus' name.